Welcome to Wildcat Science with Mrs. Helgo. This is Human Biology, Chapter 4, Part 1, and we're still in the body as a whole unit. And today, like I said, we're talking about Chapter 4, and we know that that includes tissues, glands, and membranes. So in class, we're going to read about Ben and how a tissue failure affects his whole body. And we're going to have quite a few people involved. So, tissues. Let's start out with tissues. What are they? They are groups of cells similar in structure that are specialized to do a specific task. And your body has four main types of tissues: the muscle tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, and connective tissue. Your book goes about them in a slightly different order, but this is the order I want to go through because it's tackling some of the easier ones first. So, muscle tissue. Muscle tissue, what do those cells have in common? They are long and thread-like, and their function is they produce movement by contraction. There are three different types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue, and those are connected to bones and help move the body. They are under voluntary control, so you can move those muscles. Their cells are striated, makes them look like they have lines in them, and we'll talk more about that later. And they are multinucleated. Each cell is long and has multiple nucleuses, multiple nuclei. A second type of muscle tissue is cardiac muscle, and unsurprisingly, this is found in the heart, and it is under involuntary control, which is good because if you had to remember to tell your heart to beat, that's probably all you'd have time to do all day. The cells are also look striated, and they are branched, and they may be multinucleated. And the third and final type is smooth muscle, and that forms the walls of hollow organs, like the walls of your intestines. They are under involuntary control, which is good because you don't have to think about every time you want to move food through your intestine. And the cells are smooth, they are not striated, and they only have one nucleus per cell. So here's a picture, and you can see the muscle fibers and the multiple nuclei in there. So looking in our book on page 68, there's a nice picture of the three different types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. I would suggest looking that up. And also we're going to do some checkpoints on page 69. Make sure that you can answer these. What are the three types of muscle tissue? And we will delve more into this in Chapter 8. The second type of tissue is nervous tissue, which is found in the nervous system. And nervous tissue consists of nerve cell bodies plus branches that communicate by nerve impulses, or actually electrical impulses. And nervous tissue makes up the control system for your body, so it's in charge of controlling everything your body does. And it is found in the brain, found in the spinal cord, and the nerves that go all throughout your body. So a nerve cell is a neuron, and a neuron has one cell body, and then it has many branches leading into the cell body that we'll learn are called dendrites, and then one branch leading away from the cell body that we will learn is called an axon. So a lot of neuron fibers are insulated to make those messages move faster, just like you would insulate like a cord, like an electrical cord, so that the electricity goes just in one direction, it moves fast, and it doesn't like seep out in all directions. And the neuron fibers are coated in fats and lipids called myelin sheath. And what is a nerve? Well, a nerve is just a bundle of a bunch of those neuron fibers that are held together with some connective tissue. Also, there's neuroglial, which are not neurons, but they are still a nervous tissue type of cell, and they are in charge of supporting and protecting the neurons. So we can see an example of some neurons, a cell body, and some of these dendrites branching out. So looking at our checkpoints, make sure you can answer that. Page 70. What is the basic cell of the central nervous system, and what is its function? As well as 4.8, what are the non-conducting, supporting, and protecting cells of the nervous system called? And we will dive a lot more into the nervous system in chapters 9 and 10. The third category of tissue is epithelial tissue, or sometimes referred to as epithelium. And you can say either one. So epithelial tissue consists of tightly packed cells that form barriers or help protect other tissues. So they form membranes, they form ducts, they form the outer layer of your skin, they line the body cavity, they line hollow organs. They're found in a lot of different places and have a very important job. So they're more spread out than like the nervous tissue, which is just in nerves and your brain and your spinal cord and muscle, that's just muscle. So how do we organize all these different ones? Well, one way we organize them is by shape. Squamous is a flat cell. Cuboidal is a square cell. And then columnar is a long and narrow cell. And if you look on page 63, there's some nice pictures of squamous, cuboidal, and columnar cells and where they're found in the body. Epithelial tissue is also organized by how many layers it has. Simple means it has one layer. And where would you find this? In places where it'd be really good for absorption because it's just one layer, like in the digestive tract where you're trying to absorb nutrients, or in the respiratory tract where you're trying to absorb oxygen. Stratified is many layers, and it's good for wear and tear areas like your skin, where you don't want just one layer, because if you cut that one layer or wear off that one layer, you're in big trouble. So you want a bunch of layers. And pseudostratified is one layer, but they're kind of like different shapes so that it looks like it's a bunch of layers. So looking on page 64, there's a nice picture of some stratified squamous cells and where they are found. So you can see what they really look like. So some epithelial cells have special functions. For example, some epithelial cells produce secretions. And a goblet cell secretes mucus. And here you can see a goblet cell is making this mucus that looks a lot like water. And maybe that's lining, maybe that's your esophagus there. And you can see some of the other ones have cilia. So some stomach juices secrete digestive juices, like actual hydrochloric acid, and then some skin cells secrete sweat and oil. If you look on page 64, there's a nice picture of some cells that secrete, some epithelial cells that are secreting things. There are some pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells and goblet cells and cilia that you can see lining your trachea. And then some simple columnar epithelial cells and goblet cells that are lining your intestines. So many glands are made up of epithelial tissue. Like we talked about, some can secrete things, but then also the whole gland is made up of epithelial tissue. And there are two main types of glands, endocrine and exocrine. Endocrine, endo being inside, and it has no ducts, and the secretions get absorbed right into the body, right into the blood. And hormones are all made in endocrine and secreted by endocrine glands. And then exocrine glands, where the secretions go out, they have ducts and they secrete fluids away from the tissue. So outside of your body or outside of the inside of your body. So if it was to secrete something into your digestive tract, that's going to eventually lead out. And so an example would be the oil or sebaceous glands on your skin. So looking at our checkpoints on page 65, make sure you can answer these questions. What are the three basic shapes of epithelial cells? What are the two categories of glands based on their methods of secretion? And then we're going to be jumping into this more in chapter 6 when we get into the integumentary system about the skin, hair, and nails. And then chapter 12 about the endocrine system. Quick review on our shapes and layers. So we can see simple, one layer can be squamous, really flat, cuboidal, which are cubes, or columnar, which are tall and skinny, and stratified is many layers, and that could be simple stratified squamous, where they are flat and there's a bunch of layers of them, or stratified cuboidal. And then pseudostratified kind of looks like multiple layers, but it's actually one layer. And then you've got some pseudostratified columnar epithelium. And then jumping down, this picture would be also stratified, multiple layers, so stratified columnar. So our fourth and final type of tissue is connective tissue. And what does all connective tissue have in common? It creates the fabric of you. It forms the supporting fabric of your body. And all connective tissue, what it has in common is it has living cells that are in this non-living matrix. And that matrix is a background material between the cells, and it could be several different things. It could be water, it could be fibers, it could be hard minerals, stuff like that. And this type of tissue is the most diverse of all four of the different types of tissue. And there are many different types of cells that are considered connective tissue. And it's found everywhere in your body. So much, if you got rid of the epithelial cells, epithelial tissue, the muscle tissue, and the nervous tissue, you could still see everything in your body. So, how are we going to classify all these different types of connective tissue? So first one is circulating connective tissue, which we'll talk about. Then we have generalized connective tissue, and there are a couple of different subgroups, loose and dense. And then loose, there's two subgroups there, areolar and adipose. And then dense has three subgroups, irregular, regular, and elastic. And then the third main type of connective tissue is structural connective tissue. Our first type of connective tissue is circulating connective tissue, and that has cells suspended in fluid. So the matrix is liquid. So there are two types of circulating connective tissue. One is blood, so the blood cells are suspended in blood plasma, which is basically mostly water. And then lymph, where the lymphocytes, the lymph cells, are suspended in lymph, which is basically plasma, which is basically water, but it's in a different part of your body. And we will learn more about that in chapters 13 and 16 when we learn about the circulatory system and about the lymphatic system. The second type of connective tissue is generalized connective tissue, and it is found everywhere in your body. So generally, it supports and protects the structures. There are so many differences between the different types of generalized connective tissue, but we know that one thing it has in common is supports and protects. So I like generalized, and generally supports and protects as a good mnemonic device to remember that. Okay, so there are two main types of generalized connective tissue, loose and dense. Let's start with loose generalized connective tissue. And it is loose because it has a soft consistency. And then within that, there are two types. You don't need to write this down, but we will get into it. Areolar and adipose. And you can see this picture over here. This is adipose tissue, which is fat tissue. And we have these cells, and then there's lots of fats or lipids, and that is considered the matrix. And we will get more into that in our next video. See you then.